presentare questo live talk con Melanie Ribak. Questo live talk nasce dalla collaborazione con AIEA, che è la società, che è l'associazione che rappresento e che fa parte di ISACA, che è un capitolo internazionale con più di 140.000 iscritti, 200 capitoli, e il capitolo italiano che rappresento ha quasi 1.000 iscritti. La collaborazione con ATED, di cui sono socio, ha permesso di contattare Melanie e strutturare questo tipo di intervento. Passiamo alla presentazione di Melanie, che non è così facile come sembrerebbe, perché si potrebbe partire da due direzioni. Si potrebbe partire dal suo curriculum accademico, citando gli iscritti accademici e le pubblicazioni che ha fatto, oppure dai risultati che ha raggiunto nella sua attività, partendo per esempio dalla finale raggiunta nel 2010 come ITC Professional Woman in Olanda, oppure nel 2016 quando è stata segnalata come una delle top 50 donne che sono motivo di ispirazione, sempre in Olanda. Ma preferisco in questa brevissima, davvero, perché voglio lasciare Melanie parlare, introduzione, partire da due aggettivi: radicale e coraggiosa, che sono i due aggettivi che mi sono venuti in mente quando l'ho conosciuta ormai tanti anni fa ad Istanbul. Radicale, preso dal vocabolario radicale, vuol dire relativo alla radice, all'intima essenza di qualche cosa. Ecco, la società che ha fondato, abbandonando l'accademia, Meran si chiama Radically Open Security. È una no profit molto particolare e si connota in maniera radicale, proprio decisa, con una tipologia ben precisa di consulenza. Loro dicono che insegnano a pescare. Il loro approccio è teach to fish, quindi nelle loro consulenze lasciano tutte le informazioni all'azienda in maniera che possa continuare la loro attività senza l'intervento poi consulenziale della società, e i framework, i documenti che vengono redatti durante la consulenza, depurati chiaramente da tutti gli aspetti che possono essere ricollegati alla società, vengono rilasciati pubblicamente a disposizione di tutti in maniera open source. Questo significa essere radicale nell'ottica che sta portando avanti Melanie. Coraggiosa, eh sì, una donna coraggiosa, perché queste teorie che spesso si sentono, quindi le ha declinate nella realtà, e nella realtà ha fondato una società che si basa e continua a essere, penso, una delle prime open source security aziende, firms, nel mondo. Quindi coraggiosa, ha lasciato l'accademia, ha rinunciato a molti soldi delle consulenze e sta portando avanti questo concetto che si ricollega alla teoria che molti economisti ci stanno spiegando della necessità di cambiare paradigma nel mondo della post-crescita, nel mondo che si prospetta adesso. Lascio la parola quindi a Melanie e vi auguro a tutti un buon ascolto. Grazie mille. It's your turn.
Thank you, Paolo. I apologize that I barely understood any of that. Pardon me, my Italian is not all that good. But all the same, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm here to talk to you today about post-growth entrepreneurship. And honestly, again, I don't entirely know what was said during the introduction. But I do have a security consultancy company called Radically Open Security. So today actually has been a really exciting day for me. I'm sure you all are familiar with COVID-19 contact tracing apps. Here in the Netherlands, my company, Radically Open Security, has been involved with penetration testing our Dutch COVID-19 contact tracing app called the Corona Melder. And actually, upright this entire morning, this recording, I've spent the entire morning watching the first chamber of Dutch Parliament, the Senate, actually discussing the security and the privacy of our Corona Melder app, including some findings that were brought up in a pen test report that was commissioned by the Dutch Ministry of Health. So yeah, it's been actually a really cool morning. It was also a really cool day yesterday for the same reasons. And yeah, our company has also been involved, by the way, in pen testing some COVID-19 contact tracing apps for some other countries. So Immuni in Italy, also Protego in Poland. We've also been testing the Google Apple exposure notification API. In fact, yesterday we just released the description of a CVE, a vulnerability that we found in the Google Apple exposure notification framework. So yeah, check. I guess also link for a link to that. And yeah, for the rest, yeah, it's great. We've been working with the European Union, the European Commission on this, and we're also looking at the European Federated Gateway as well. So yeah, so this has really been sort of interesting times for our company lately. We've also done, I guess, to give you a quick overview on who I am and who my company is, we're a 6.5-year-old social enterprise in the computer security consultancy space. So we have roughly 40 staff members, and we've had over 100 customers. Radically Open Security is the only Dutch supplier that is a preferred security vendor for Google. We also do work with Mozilla as part of their Mozilla Open Source Security program. We do work for the Open Tech Fund in the States, but also, Dutch government, banks, insurance companies, hosting providers, telcos, SMEs, startups, and also nonprofits. We actually do not-for-profit work with the nonprofit sector, so we do work at cost price for NGOs, nonprofits, and civil society. Thus, sort of charging, the top price to the corporates and governments, and then allowing us to basically give our services away for free to those who can't afford them. But because, of course, civil society organizations have some of the scariest attack models and almost no budget. So yeah, our company has been really successful in the last 6.5 years. We've won quite a number of awards for this, and also, yeah, what I can also say is that we donate our profits basically in full to charity, which is also something that goes a little bit further than your average social enterprise. So we are registered as something called a fiscal fundraising institution. In Dutch, it's called a fiscaal fondswervende instelling. And what it is it's a special Dutch tax construction that originally came from the Dutch church. So basically, occasionally the church wants to do a commercial spin-off, and then they raise money for something, and then they bring that money, with a tax benefit back to the church again. Now, a famous example of this is the Language Institute Regina Caeli, which is otherwise known as the Nuns of Vught. So basically, the nuns created this Language Institute. The Language Institute is independently operating and of pretty good quality. And then the profits from that institute went back to the nuns. This is how this construction works. So we decided to sort of take this church construction and decide, well, let's make our commercial spin-off, a security consultancy company, and our church, the NLNet Foundation. And the NLNet Foundation is basically a charitable foundation that supports open source digital rights and everything for a better internet. So they've given money, they're basically a funding agency. They've given money to organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, GNU, Tor, Jitsi, DNSSEC, WireGuard, a lot of projects basically that make the internet better. So really what I had wanted to do with Radically Open Security was to ensure that 90% of our profits or more were basically going to support, the community from which our ethical hackers are being sourced from. Because I think that security is really something that should be for the public good. It's not a cash cow that should be used to just make a small number of investors and founders wealthy. And in such a way, I think that Paolo mentioned that I come from an academic background. I used to be an assistant professor of computer science at the Free University of Amsterdam in the computer systems department doing security research. In the same way that I used to leverage my research group back when I was at the university, that's now the way that I leverage my company. Because it actually turns out, and I've learned this along the way, that companies can be a really amazing form of activism. You wouldn't think about that, in the beginning. But it turns out actually that companies are really flexible vehicles for being able to get things done. You know, those things. I mean, of course, most of the time when we think of business, we think of shareholder returns. Like this is, shareholder primacy. Like this is really the primary version of, the reason why business exists. But truthfully speaking, it doesn't have to be that way. Um, I kind of like to say that extraction is the original sin of business. And there's a story recently that I discovered that I think illustrates this quite well. So the story is called The 11th Round, and it's by an economist whose name is Bernard Lietaer. Now, the way that the story goes is there is a village in the outback, and there are people who are, they have a market and they're exchanging chickens and cows and, basically, bustling market. Now, one day, a stranger shows up, and the stranger has a white hat and shiny shoes. And he looks at the people in the village and says, "Oh, you're so primitive the way that you're doing this. All of this carrying around chickens, this is incredibly inefficient. What I would like for you to do, tomorrow, bring me a cowhide, and then come back in 24 hours, and then I will make things much easier for you." So in fact, they do this. They bring him the cowhide, then they leave, then they come back the next day. Now the stranger has cut out a number of rounds, basically coins, from the cowhide. And there's 10 families, and basically each of the families receives 10 rounds. Now the stranger says, now each of these rounds is worth one chicken. Now, what you can do is from now on, you can exchange these rounds rather than having to carry around chickens with you because that's totally inconvenient. Use these rounds, it's going to be much easier. So, in fact, these families go back to the market. They are exchanging the rounds now instead of the chickens, and they're really happy with the system. Now they go back to the stranger and they're thrilled and they're like, "Wow, this is amazing. Thank you so much for this amazing innovation. What can we do to thank you for this?" And then the stranger says, "Well, there's one thing that you can do for me. I'm going to come back in a year from now, and I want you to give me an 11th round back." So the villagers then think about it and they're like, "Yeah, but where do we get the 11th round from?" And he says, "Just you wait. You'll see." Now, this left the families with a dilemma, and there were basically three ways in which they were able to resolve this dilemma. The first way that they could resolve it is just quite simply by defaulting on the stranger. In other words, he comes back in a year from now, and they just give him the 10 rounds back, and they can't pay the 11th. That's the first solution. The second solution is that the 10 families can basically cut out one of the families. So essentially, in that way, 9 of the families would have 11 rounds, and then the last family would only have 1 round left and wouldn't be able to pay the stranger back. Or the third option is to breed more chickens. Now, after deliberation, they decided that this third one was the better option. So they bred all kinds of extra chickens, and sure enough, the stranger came back in a year from now, and all 10 families were able to pay back that 11th round. Now, everyone was happy, and the stranger said, "Wow, great that you were able to pay me, this 11th round. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lend you another 10 rounds, and then I'm going to come back in another year from now, and then you can pay me another 11th round again." Now, after a few years of this, all of a sudden, the villagers started realizing that their entire village became completely overrun by chicken poop. And they were eating chicken all the time, and they everything was like feather pillows, and at a certain point they were just starting to get sick of having all these chickens, and they said, "We actually don't need to be breeding all these chickens." This is another thing that happened was this. This extraction from the system, basically an interest-bearing loan, also called usury. This caused competition amongst the families, And once upon a time, when there was a disaster, they were super willing to help each other, rebuild things, share food amongst themselves. But now that there was this competition, in that the other families could benefit from cutting one of the families out, they were much less likely to help each other. So this situation actually created artificial scarcity, which then caused competition amongst the families. So as you can see, this interest-bearing loans, this financial extraction from the system, it created both environmental pressure in, causing them to have what is basically required to be a growth economy. In other words, they had to keep breeding chickens, or else at a certain point they couldn't keep the system going. But also this social pressure in creating competition. And, you know, another thing also is that the only way that they can keep such a system going is by taking, these human relationships, like their willingness to be able to help each other on a non-monetized basis, and essentially, monetizing it. So, this really starts to ask questions about economic growth. Now, taking this example and bringing it back into the modern century, if we think about economic growth on a macroeconomic level, the first thing we think about is gross domestic product, GDP. So, as we know, growth always has to be up and to the right. What happens when that growth starts to flatten? You get recession and layoffs, and widespread suffering. Why is this the case? Now, the reason why this is the case is because there is so much extraction happening from our economy that our economy needs to continue growing just to maintain a steady state. However, is this the way that it should be? I mean, we've learned most certainly in the last 6 months from the whole COVID-19 epidemic that eternal economic growth is not realistic. We take for granted, in the last, lifetime that indeed the economy has mostly grown. But we also saw, 6 months ago that for a short period that the stock market crashed. You know, and on top of that, we're also seeing like never before the disconnect between Wall Street and the Main Street economy. Stock speculators, of course, once the stock market crashed, started investing in stocks, causing essentially speculative behavior to drive the value of these stocks back up again. While at the same time, the Main Street economy is still reeling with joblessness at high, all sort of like all-time highs. And a lot of companies still that are suffering because of the shutdowns that we have because of our corona countermeasures, and I don't see any way that we're getting out of this anytime soon. So, it's been these days, sort of a common idea that, this is, the time that we are trying to redesign the new normal, because we're moving into this new situation and it's obvious that the world is not going to be the same as it has been. But considering still more, the behavior of the stock market, the problem is we can sort of point a finger also at our startup ecosystem and how it's promoting founders to build their certain kinds of businesses. Now, we like to talk about unicorns, right? And a unicorn is a company that has a $1 billion valuation or higher. Of course, this idea came from Silicon Valley. It's also been incredibly popular, has spread across to Europe. Certainly in the Netherlands, I mean, we have a member of the Dutch royal family who is also part of an organization called TechLeap, which is one of the major entrepreneurship organizations in the Netherlands. And he likes to say, the Netherlands should be a country of unicorns. Okay, but what exactly actually are we asking for? Now, I think rather than calling, this kind of a company a unicorn, I think rather we should be thinking in terms of battery chickens. So, in other words, you have a startup and you force feed it with investment capital for 3 to 5 years, so it grows exponentially. At that point in time, once it has become sufficiently attractively plumped up, because of this investment capital, then you lead it to the exit, aka the liquidation moment, when essentially the chicken is slaughtered and all of the value is pulled out of that company. When that financial value is extracted, that typically goes to the shareholders, also to the founders. Now, this is really the moment of extraction from our economy when the 1% is being created. Because, of course, it's the 99%, after the fact, that is sort of left over with sort of that empty shell of a company. Because, I mean, it's well known that anytime an exit happens, whether we're talking an IPO, direct listing, merger acquisition, it tends to really kill, the soul of the company and destabilize it. So, but the problem is that, in the startup ecosystem, we're being taught this system of capital, scale, exit. This is the core of what we're being taught. And at the heart of this is the exponential curve. We all know what it looks like, the exponential curve. It starts flat and then, rises up into the sunset. And, mathematically speaking, anything exponential cannot last too long. That is, the nature of exponentiality. Um, so, we need to ask ourselves, when we see these exponential curves, that we're getting in business schools, in business incubators, why is it there? This is what we need to ask. Why? What purpose is this exponential curve serving? And of course, if you think about it, the exponential curve is really solely in service of the exit. If there were no exit, then an exponential curve would not be needed. Slow and organic growth will just as easily get you there. But the problem is, we are being taught to build revenue negative, cashing out shell organizations that essentially are pulling a pump and dump scheme onto the public markets. The majority of unicorns, when you look at them, they are revenue losing. They are cash flow negative. And if you look at a number of the really big, so-called success stories, like the Ubers and the Airbnbs, and of course, yeah, I mean, WeWork is one of the more egregious examples that just barely, avoided becoming a success story. But it makes total sense. When you are growing that fast, when you're essentially plumping up your company with staff that quickly, it's almost impossible to be able to organically get customers at the rate that you would actually be able to go back into the black again with your revenue. But the point is that being revenue positive isn't the objective. It's not the point. What winds up happening is if you can IPO, in other words, selling your company to 1,000 shareholders, or if you can make your company look like an attractive acquihire, so that a larger corporation like Google or whoever can buy you, then the whole point, that you are revenue negative actually doesn't matter, because whoever paid for you, basically the last investor, is always left holding the bag, you know? And once the founders and the investors have had their exit moment, then the fact that the company is revenue negative is no longer their problem, you know? Now, and this is what I mean by a pump and dump scheme on the public markets. This is why we shouldn't be surprised that once the shareholders have purchased the Airbnb and the Ubers of this world, because the company is fundamentally revenue losing. The performance of that company is going to that whoever owns the shares at that point is going to start losing money. As the previous owners also were. But of course, we're not looking at this, and not paying attention to this before we buy the stock. We just keep hoping that we can have this continued economic growth, so that this growth story can keep continuing. And again, the moment that this stops, the last investor is in trouble. So there have been discussions about whether or not this kind of pump and dump behavior should even be legal. Because this is sort of bastardizing the whole point of, I think, building businesses in the first place. I mean, to me, when I think about the what a business should be, I mean, business at its essence could be nothing more than just a group of people banding together to get something done in a financial way. That's it. That's all business, should be. But unfortunately, it's taken on this extra layer of neoliberalistic baggage that, quite frankly, shouldn't be there, and it most certainly doesn't have to be there. But we need to point our finger at our education systems in perpetuating this. And I can tell you another story. Um, so Occupy Wall Street, which I'm sure some of you remember, they organized a protest, basically, of EC10, the Introduction to Economics class of Professor Gregory Mankiw at Harvard University. So the students, they sat in the front row, and then they stood up at the start of the class, and they said, "We do not want the ideology that you are teaching in this class." And then they walked out. Now, this student movement led to a number of, student organizations popping up that were discussing how to rethink the economics curriculum in business schools. So there's one group called Reinventing Economics that's quite prominent. Also, Post Crash Economics Society. There's a number of organizations like this. Now, I think a related question that we need to be asking is, why are there no walkouts from our business schools, from our entrepreneurship programs, and from our business incubators? Because quite frankly, our entrepreneurship education faces exactly the same problem. Now, the problem at its essence is that there's a financial conflict of interest that's present in our business education. It's easiest to explain by looking at incubators. So the majority of incubators, they actually act like investors at the same time that they are educating the startup founders. So, for example, the majority of incubators, they take equity in exchange for, the incubation services. So in exchange for some classes on how to start a business and also access to their network. Now, what this means is that the business model of the incubators starts to come into conflict with the actual, the actual content that they're teaching as educational institutions. Now, I have done some collaborative work with the Amsterdam Center for Entrepreneurship, ACE. And they are the incubation system of the public university system here in Amsterdam. Therefore, they're subsidy funded, so they actually don't take equity in their startups. So they rely on a different model than a lot of commercial incubators. However, another time I went to another incubator, a commercial incubator, who will not be named, but I said to them, hey guys, I am already teaching classes in post-growth entrepreneurship at ACE, and I'm doing it completely free of charge, and I'm discussing new forms of social entrepreneurship. I would be really happy, completely free of charge. I won't, charge you a penny to also give some post-growth entrepreneurship lectures to some of your founders so they can get some new ideas about how to create a better social enterprise. Now, the leadership of this incubator thought about it, and they were like, well, I mean, actually, I'm not sure that our investors would like this because, our investors are investment banks like Merrill Lynch. So, yeah, I'm really sorry, but I'm afraid that I have to politely decline. Now, stop and think about it. This commercial incubator just refused to, have someone come in to give a free lecture on new forms of social entrepreneurship because they were afraid that this would be in conflict with their business model. Why are we not talking about this? Similarly, if you look at business schools, I think there's a different relation between large business schools and small business schools. But we do have to remember that some of the largest business schools, the Harvards and the MITs and the Stanfords, they have incredibly large endowments that they get from successful business people. Those that are making those donations to the university, those endowed shares and whatnot, and buildings named after them. I mean, they are in favor of maintaining the status quo. And I think that this is what we need to remember more than anything else. When you are a startup founder and you accept investment capital, you are embedding the status quo into your company. Yeah. The only way to really be able to start a company in which you can remain independent and build a company of any form of real social social motivation and social impact is by steering clear of these investors because they are out for a return. Now, of course, in the social enterprise space, then people say, yeah, but what about impact investors? They're trying to mix investment with social impact. Right. Problem is, it's the same fundamental problem because with social impact investors, maybe they want a 3x return rather than a 10x return. But at the end of the day, they still want to see a return on their investments. You know, I mean, this is why they're investors. This is the definition of an investor. If they weren't looking for a return on their investment, then they would be giving an interest-free loan or a gift or a subsidy. These are different things. So, even with social impact investors, the problem is there's also a whole lot of ugliness that winds up getting involved in social enterprise as well, which also leads to concepts like social washing, greenwashing, impact washing, whatever, that we're also familiar with, leading people to ask, well, what is actually the difference between a social enterprise and a normal company with CSR, or a normal company that's just a little bit less evil. So, and truthfully, the social entrepreneurs don't even know how to answer this question. Now, the problem I think here is that this extraction, has also pervaded the social enterprise space. And Mohammed Yunus, he's a well-known economist who created he won a Nobel Prize for creating microfinance, and he started the Crimean Bank. He also wrote a book called Building Social Business, and his definition of social business is as follows: uh, dividend-free companies for solving human problems. Now, the social enterprise ecosystem jumped on his ideas, and they were like, solving human problems. This is great, no dividends. We'll pretend we didn't hear this, and thus, began, the kind of social entrepreneurship ecosystem that has these impact investors, and that involves things like, selling your B corporation to Unilever. Now, I think that what Mohammed Yunus was saying in his concept of social business about no dividend, no extraction, this is the key. And I've spent a lot of time also with radically open security, with dog fooding these ideas on the concept of what I call post-growth entrepreneurship. And post-growth entrepreneurship has three parts. The first part of post-growth entrepreneurship is bootstrapping, aka avoid the investors. The second part of post-growth entrepreneurship is what I call flat growth. So flat growth, so basically growth that flattens off rather than the exponential curve. I can explain the concept of flat growth by quoting a story from the economist Kate Raworth in her TED Talk that's called "An Economy is Meant to Thrive and Not Grow." If you consider nature, for example, let's take a tree or even a human being, but let's look at a tree. At the beginning of a tree's life, it grows really, really quickly, almost exponentially. But then at a certain point, this growth starts to flatten out. The tree reaches its maximum size. And at a certain point, that tree stops growing and it starts thriving. Now, if the tree wants to continue growing, well, it can't. It's reached its maximum size. But what does it do then? It drops seeds, and those seeds grow into new trees, etc. Now, the question that Kate Rayworth asks is, if this is how it works with nature, why is it any different with our businesses? Now, one prominent example in nature of something that grows exponentially forever, that's cancer, and it is toxic to whatever system it's living upon. So, why then are we using exponential growth as our role model, as our example? Maybe we shouldn't be. Now, the third part of post growth entrepreneurship is non extraction. So, basically, asking the question, how can we make sure that financial value is not pulled out of companies? Now, there's two ways to do this that I can see, both of which were highlighted by Mohammed Yunus in his social business concept. Now, Mohammed Yunus had described two kinds of social business, type 1 and type 2 social business. Type 1 social business is a business that is completely purpose driven, and there is no extraction from this business. Basically, all of the profits from this business are reinvested into the business, into the growth of the business, into treating everybody fairly, into really maximizing that positive impact without any extracting, without any weakening, mission drift, and he demonstrated this concept also with his own Crimean forms of business. I mean, one good example was Shakti Doi yogurt that he did in cooperation with the Danone Corporation. So, the second type of social business that he described is one in which there is financial extraction, but that financial extraction goes to charity. So, and it turns out that I discovered long after the fact, after I'd already made the decision to become a fiscal fundraising institution, that actually what I was doing with Radically Open Security was actually an implementation of Mohammed Yunus's concept of a type 2 social business. Because basically we're giving 90% of our profits to the Enelnet Foundation, and that last 10% is basically staying in the company as our cash flow buffer. Because of course we need cash to be able to run a company. Otherwise, if customers pay late, then I can't afford to pay my staff on time. So yeah, so inadvertently, I'd found that I'd actually built a social business. You know, now, what I want with post growth entrepreneurship is that we can start bringing these kinds of alternative narratives, into our business educational institutions. I think we also need to talk to the government also to get them to understand that the traditional startup ecosystem that they have been stimulating, it's not getting us there. It's not working for the people, and it's not even working for the government. Another example that I can give of this, I mean, you know, getting investors and also having exits is a governance nightmare for companies. Uh, for example, there's a company that spun off of Leiden University in the Netherlands, a really nice biotech company. And at a certain point, usual story, they got investors, grew exponentially, and they got acquired by some entity in the United States. Now, the problem is this biotech company is now producing COVID-19 vaccines. But because this Dutch company was acquired by the Americans, they are being forced to serve the US market before they can serve the Dutch market. You know, and at this point, the Dutch government is just sort of left thinking, well, what are we doing? I mean, why is it actually that our Dutch companies aren't staying Dutch, and this keeps happening again and again. And this is also a really pervasive problem in the security industry that I also work in. Our market leader here in the Netherlands, they built a bunch of monitoring black boxes that got used all throughout the government, military, business, Dutch business. What happened? They got acquired by the British. At a certain point in time, the entire Dutch government was like, oh crap, all of our data now is going to the British. So what did they do? Another company spun off that was Dutch again, and then all of the customers sort of jumped ship from the original company, ran to the new startup because, hey, at least it was still Dutch. And then what happened? 2 years later, I read the news. Oh, this brand new company was now acquired by the Romanians. When are we going to learn? you know and this is not just a Dutch issue. This is, I mean, for Italy or Switzerland or any other countries. I mean, we need to think about governance, and we need to think about where our innovation budgets and of course, according to the economist Maria Mazzucato, the largest venture capitalist of all is the government. With all of these subsidies that are going to fund, universities, and they're giving subsidies to early stage startups. The government is the primary investor in all of this. So why is it then that the government is also embracing a business model that doesn't even allow the startups that are being promoted to even be able to maintain under control, and in service of the communities that started them? I hope that we can bring this kind of a discussion also to the governments. Um, you know, what we can do is build alternatives. I started 2.5 years ago a post-growth startup incubator called Nonprofit Ventures. We've been organizing educational activities, workshops, trainings, and also in March, right before the COVID shutdowns, we actually organized a startup boot camp for a group of 20 people on the Dutch island of Terschelling. We spent a week, basically. It was sort of a kind of a combination between a personal growth retreat and a startup boot camp. So we mixed things like, 15 minutes of meditation before breakfast, 15 minutes of meditation before dinner, with things like morning journaling, something called the morning pages from The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is a way of sort of unblocking ourselves and promoting creativity. Also, walks, on the beach. People went for morning swims, but at the same time, we were also there to work. I mean, people filled out business model canvases. We were trying to validate markets, and at the end of the day, a couple actual startups got spun out of this week interselling. A couple great businesses like XenoLearn, and which is doing things for education around racism, and also disrupt development, which is also now also doing work for connecting business with the not-for-profit sector. Real companies came out of this. And these real companies are committed to being post-growth. Now, the thing is, like, any of us can do this, and it takes one founder to create a company that can create employment opportunity that can take all the rest of us along. Now, if you think about it, and especially with in terms of type 2 social business, imagine the possibilities of this. We are building non-commercial businesses that are colonizing the commercial market, that are redirecting cash out of the commercial economy, and that are putting it towards cross-subsidizing social initiatives. If you think about it, let's say hypothetically speaking, that someone created a post-growth accountancy firm, something, of, let's say, the same size as Deloitte or Accenture or Ernst& Young or one of these, big four. Imagine if we started a not-for-profit version of that, and the profits were redirected towards a foundation that could pay a universal basic income pilot, in the Netherlands, or perhaps in Switzerland or Italy or any other country. I mean, imagine if Google were a post-growth company and did the same, And this is sort of what I'm saying. I think oftentimes for social change, and also for things like the implementation of a universal basic income, we always assume that it's the government that has to decide about this. We have to lobby the politicians. But I don't think that's necessarily what we need. We, as individuals, we can leverage the private sector and can build our own companies as pure activistic vehicles. Business is one of the most effective forms of activism, and business can be a mixed media for art. Stop and think about how you would create an avant-garde business, something that is completely weird and bizarre, but still financially supports itself and sort of ticks all the boxes of being a business. What about business as a form of spirituality? It's no coincidence that the Buddhists called right livelihood one of their noble eightfold paths. In fact, even Pope Francis wrote in a in circular that I wrote an encyclical about economic growth, and questioning the impact that this is having on the environment, leading to the questions of, well, why is the Pope getting involved with economic change? Well, why isn't the Pope getting involved with economic change? I mean, we can also consider this to be our religious or spiritual imperatives, to take these issues seriously. And how can we use business as a form of creative expression? If you consider it as entrepreneurs, all of us are on a hero's journey, a la Joseph Campbell. And, if we were to look at our journey and our businesses as a play in the theater, how could we achieve dramatic unity between our main purpose, our North Star, our motivation, and our everyday operational decisions, the little tiny decisions that we make in running our business? You know, if we can ask ourselves these questions and make business more personal, then we'll start to be able to use business as a vehicle for positive impact. And we also, as an entrepreneur, if we can use our businesses as expressions of ourselves, it also implies that we also maybe need to stop and think about who we ourselves actually are. you know and leading to the questions of how can we be a whole entrepreneur if we're not a whole human being. So, and this is where I think, coming back to the education system, we need to pay attention, not just to building good business people and successful founders, but to also developing all the founders and business students as whole human beings. Because until we ourselves, don't know what we want and we aren't willing to take responsibility for contributing to a better world in a non-extractive way, then we need to retool our education. Anyway, I think that basically this is what I wanted to tell you all. I'm certainly I'm a bit over time now, so I understood that there was also going to be some questions that were going to be asked. And yeah, if Paolo or anyone else would like to ask these questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? You can feel free to type them into the comment box. No questions? All right. Well, look, if there's no questions, then what I can do is I can point you to some additional resources. So if you want to know more about post-growth entrepreneurship, then I would highly recommend that you have a look at postgrowthentrepreneurship.com. There are a number of videos, including a talk that I did at TEDx Berlin that explain the concept. And most importantly, there's actually an entire workshop that I taught at the Free University of Amsterdam. The video is a little bit old now. I think I recorded it maybe about a year and a half ago, so it's not the most recent content, but it does most certainly get the point across. It's a series of 8 videos, and it's 6 hours long. So it's free of charge. It's open sourced with a Creative Commons license. So I would definitely highly recommend that you all have a look at that. Another thing also is if you like this, if you find this inspiring, then I would also invite you, get in touch with me. I mean, I'm active on LinkedIn. So in either case, I would certainly recommend that you reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me, feel free to send me a message. We also have nonprofit ventures where we're organizing new activities. We're actually planning in the pipeline upcoming a incubation program, which is going to be conducted online. So if any of you all are interested perhaps in joining us, feel free to let me know. And yeah, for the rest, I hope that this today has been thought-provoking, and I hope that you all will be inspired by this to, build your own nonprofit businesses. So thank you so much.